red flag flying here.
Hello and welcome to Socialist Think Tank. Today we're here with John Dunn. Hello, John.
Hiya, Paul.
How are you doing today?
I'm surviving. We've survived a year of pandemic, and I think that's about the best we could have hoped for, given what the Tories have done to us.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of us are just clinging on, aren't we, at the minute? But
Yeah.
I'm going to be asking you a little while actually about that background, because that background's really interesting. But we'll come on to that in a bit.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you the first question that we always ask: what is socialism to you?
Well, I mean, if I wanted to put it simply, it's the exact opposite to what we've got now. I think my experiences from the tender age of 16 up to now have been of recognising the injustices of the system under which we live, and how people are treated like commodities. We're disposable. You cast them aside. I grew up in Claycross. I was shaped. A lot of my adult politics was shaped by the Claycross struggle against the Rent Act. But I grew up in a mining community that was actually a community. As rough as it was a community. It held together, and then under Wilson Labour government, all the pits locally shut. But that community still held together because miners had shipped out to pits further afield. And it had a sense of identity. Now, I go back to Claycross now, and as I say, it was no utopia in those days, but it's boarded up shops, there's not a bank left, half the pubs have closed, all the working men's clubs and the miners' welfare have gone, and I just see almost desolation, and that is the system that's brought that on. It's got nothing to do with being left behind. It's called abandonment and being tossed to the wolves of capitalism. And at the same time as I've seen that, I've seen rich people get even richer and richer. So, for longer than I care to remember, I've had this sense of injustice and a feeling of knowing that this is wrong. It took me a long, long time to realise what was right and how it could be corrected. Well, I think, that sense of injustice is what fires people like me. I'm not alone in that. And it's what makes us strive for a better world. And I think that better world is one, you don't have to get too technical about it, but the system we live under, capitalism, crushes the human spirit. There are great people who are just worn down by having to work every hour, by struggling to pay the rent or the mortgage, living literally from one wage packet to the next. These people don't have time, to practice their talents. I always remember during our great miners' strike, how people came to the fore. People suddenly realised that they were poets, that they were artists, that they were almost entertainers, and they could stand on platforms. And I think that's inside every human being on this planet. And all we have to do is liberate people from the drudgery of work and make work happen for the sake of society, not for the sake of a few. We should be there to share in all the riches that technology, that the world has at its disposal, but we don't. That's creamed off by a tiny, tiny percentage of people. Or even during pandemic, you look at the likes of Jeff Bezos and Amazon and that, 200 odd billion pounds. What do you do with that money? What do you do with it? How many private islands can you buy? How many luxury yachts? How many private jets or Lamborghinis do you actually want? And that wealth should be shared out amongst us. and we should all benefit, I think, from the fruits of our labour. And we could, we could transform society. Instead of building nuclear bombs, we could be building things that are socially useful. We could be working a 15-hour week that will give us time to enjoy life, to relax, to pursue the sort of activities I've talked about. But we're being drowned in this mess of undiluted wealth that people are, rampant capitalism. It's, even Marx and company couldn't envisage what the misery and the destitution and the absolute agony it causes people. We've got people fleeing wars that our bombs are being dropped upon them, and they put their life in the hands of little dinghies to come across the channel for Priti Patel to say we're going to put them on places thousands and thousands away. There's got to be something wrong with that world. And if people don't realise that, it's time that they did. And I think we have to start, if you like, an education campaign that things don't have to be this way. There is an alternative. It's called socialism. You can't write down a script as to what it's going to be, but for heaven's sake, it's going to be better than what we've got now. And it's going to actually, as I said, it's going to liberate mankind. We're going to all reap the fruits of our labour instead of the Bezoses and the people like that. We'll be running our own lives and we'll be running society. And I know that's a vague answer, but I think to me that sums up how I feel that socialism is. It's something that, as I say, the exact opposite of what we live under now. But, put scientific theories aside and what it could be and what we could do, at the very least, it will liberate the humanity in us all.
I think that's a really hopeful kind of definition of it there. I was interested in what you were saying about billionaires there. Do you think, and you look through the pandemic, throughout the pandemic, we've had like billionaires increasing their wealth by 26%. And that money is unspendable. Like you mentioned, Lamborghinis and private islands and things like that. Do you think people really realise that money is unspendable? Like they have far too much. They couldn't possibly spend that as a human in a lifetime.
Exactly, and it's taken from our labour and it's not put back into society. It might be in some far off island trust tax haven, just money making money. But as you say, it can't be spent. You could never ever do anything with that. Whereas the working person, the pound in the pocket is spent. We hear all this talk about resurrecting the high street and things like that. A lot of our towns have got no high streets left. Everything is closed simply because people don't have the money to spend in those shops. And like I say, 2 billion. What does he do? Sit and count it all day? Does he sit on an ivory and a gold throne? I don't know. You can't even comprehend that sort of wealth. And so, yeah, you're right. It's just wasted. It's money. It's literally money being flushed down a capitalist toilet because it's worthless. If it was spent on services, on our health service, on providing proper care for the elderly, mental health services, the list's endless. That money is there and it needs to be used, not wasted and not being frittered away on people who've got far more than enough. And also, they never earned this money. If we didn't turn up for work every day, the lights wouldn't even get switched on in Amazon's warehouse. Nothing would happen without us getting out of bed at all hours of the day, going and working for a pittance. These people would have nothing. And not only would they have nothing, there would be nothing. And to me, it's as simple as that. Get rid of the rotten system and you get rid of these people.
You mentioned earlier on about mining communities and really being a community, and we've had a few people on in the past, like so we've had Heather Wood on, who described the same, and Ian Lavery and Alan Margam, and they all described what they did, and I don't think very many people understand. You know, obviously away from the northeast of England, the Durham coalfield, what the miners did in providing things like a doctor or swimming baths or welfare parks and those kind of things. Is like, could you explain a little bit about that, and then maybe also think, is there any chance of us ever doing anything like that at a community-based level again? Could you have that kind of community socialism again?
I think that was obviously what we got was based upon our industry. None of it was given to us, the miners' welfares, miners fought for this, and we all paid, a few pence each week out of our wages that kept the local welfares. In my local welfare, Claycross and Dainsmore Miners Welfare, we had 3 football pitches, a running track, tennis courts, bowling greens, a cricket field, and the miners' welfare itself. Now, luckily, a good few years ago, the local council bought those grounds off of the Coal Industry Social Welfare Organisation and actually saved them. But the miners' welfare now has gone. It was bought out. Somebody turned it into a restaurant. Somebody turned it into. Then it became something else. But it's gone. But around that was also the sense of community. A lot, people need to understand. And as you say, it's hard if people don't understand the nature of mining communities. They only existed because a pit had been sunk, and the community grew around that. And because, people toiled really, really hard work in the bowels of the earth, that created this sense of solidarity that carried on into the way people lived. They fought. I mean, what's not even known, we had pithead baths, but miners had to originally fund those pithead baths. They weren't provided by coal owners. Miners had to pay for those. But you're right. Nye Bevan himself said the health service, the National Health Service, was modelled on what he'd seen in mining communities in South Wales. South Wales Miners' Library is a famous icon of mining communities. But we did much more than that. We famous for things like brass bands and that. But I mentioned the sort of sporting facilities we had in Claycross. All those sporting facilities had teams that played on them, that played in local leagues. There are intense competition between Claycross Welfare Football Club and Claycross Works, which is another big employer was until New Labour closed that in Claycross. Tremendous rivalry between these two workplaces. Played out on the sporting field, and that sense of community. I always remember as a little kid, my dad would take me a walk up Claycross. We lived in Dainsmore, about a mile away, and I thought my dad were famous because everybody stopped him and said, "Hey up, Bernard, how you going on?" And I thought, everybody knows me dad, he must be famous. He weren't, he were a fitter at local pit, and everybody knew everybody. And you had a sense of discipline in that community. I didn't make a noise if so-and-so across the road were on nights and in bed. And in a way, it serviced itself. If anybody stepped out of line, then somebody gave them a good hiding. And it never happened again. So yeah, we had all that, and it's tragic to see it lost. It's hard to explain that I don't think any other industry had that sense of bonding, and it purely came out of the struggle that miners had to face underground, and also the struggles they had to fight against the coal owners, who were very much the Jeff Bezoses of the time. You know, uh, my local pit, Parkhouse Colliery, 1882, had a disaster. It blew up, and there's a monument in Claycross Cemetery to the men and boys. Children worked down the mine. There were boys of 14. Some of them would have been my ancestors who died in that explosion. And you know, that was the sort of price that mining communities paid. You know, in some disasters, when men were killed, the mine owners only paid the shift up to the time they died. That was what we faced. And out of that grew this social network, you know, the NUM, and also you know, in the not so distant past, there was this link between our union, the NUM, and the Labour Party. We had delegates to all the constituency parties, and it was highly likely that the secretary of your local Labour Party would be the secretary of the branch committee at the local pit. And there were people you went to about everything. You didn't just want to talk to them about council issues or pit issues. They gave advice on everything. They were the centre of the community. So, you know, that's been cast asunder. That's been destroyed. A lot of the young people of our towns and villages, in the main, have fled. You know, they took advantage in the past of free education, got qualified, and moved away to have to find jobs. And slowly these communities, and it's tragic, have been stagnating, and in fact almost dying. And now we've got the exact opposite, because the Tories have relaxed planning laws so much, and there's cheap land in mining communities. We're being colonised by these massive private estates where people just live there, just sleep there, get up in the morning and go to work, play no part in the community, don't shop locally, don't, you know, not participating in everything. So we're very, very much losing that identity. And then to top it all, we get disparaged by people who should be our own comrades, because we're somehow backward and illiterate and racist. But you know, that's a different story. But yeah, it's hard for anybody, and I'd urge anybody who's not aware of you know, how we live, go and visit a former mining community, see the boarded up shops, you know, see the closed down clubs and miners' welfares, but still see the hope. People are still clinging on. You know, you're up in Durham yourself, you know, the testimony to the continued fighting spirit and survival spirit of the miners has got to be the gala, you know. And it's tragic that we've lost two now, thanks to, you know, the Tories mishandling, deliberate mishandling of COVID. And if there's any reason, any other reason to want revenge on these bastards, it's losing two Durham miners' galas, the high spot of my summer.
Yeah, we're absolutely gutted about that again. It's the second one, understandable last year as well, but they could have handled it so much better, and we could have been there this year enjoying ourselves. And sadly, it's awful when you see places like New Zealand where they're actually enjoying their lives, and we're stuck here. So with regards to socialism, then, do you always feel that this has been something that's been in you? Was this something like you grew up with and felt like you were a socialist, or is it in you, like did the word come after and you were always like that?
I wasn't born into a political family. My dad, like most miners, always voted Labour. But you know, they weren't political animals. But I I I stumbled into it in a way. When I was 16, say way back in the mists of time, 1968, it was, you know, the start of a real change in society, different forms of music, a counterculture emerging around that music, but also there were massive events happening. I was very much influenced by the strike wave in France and the near revolution in '68. I also came across Che Guevara, who'd been uh, killed that year, and you know, started looking up things like that purely because I've been at grammar school and I started growing my hair, which doesn't mean it was long. It meant it started covering my ears, and I was always in trouble for that. I got caned. We had the cane. You know, it was sort of grammar school where some teachers still wore capes and things like that. And here was I sort of rebelling against that. So, you know, I paid the price for it. But that sort of led me into politics in a very bizarre way, because when the school decided to expel me for all my, you know, my sort of activities, the chairman of the school governors at that time were a fellow you might have heard of, Dennis Skinner. This was before he went into Parliament, and he worked with me. He'd worked with me dad at Parkhouse Pit, and he knew me dad, so he actually intervened to stop me being expelled. Because he said, I know this lad's dad, I'll have a word with him and things like that. This were all, I only found this out from Dennis years later. I mean, it had no effect on me. I were in my element, being a rebel, shall we say. So eventually, they didn't expel me, being a grammar school. They took me off the register. And, you know, I then went off, and it were the days where you could leave school and walk in. I walked out of school and literally got a job on a nearby building site. But I found that hod carrying and things like that weren't suited to a former grammar school boy. And then there were one or two things happening in Clay Cross that I got involved in. This is even before, you know, the famous rent rebellion. And one day I'm walking down Bertrand Avenue, and Dennis Skinner lived on the corner of Bertrand Avenue and Thanet Street, and he's in his gown and he says, "Hey, I want you." He'd just become an MP. This is 1971. I was 19, and he shouted me over and said, he told me this story about trying to get me saved from expulsion. And he'd seen me being active in a few things locally. He says, "I want you to join Labour Party." Now, I'm a 19-year-old kid, and this is Dennis Skinner. What do I say? And, I shit myself, to be honest. And so I found myself in Labour Party. A few years later, I find myself getting surcharged, facing bankruptcy and financial ruin for the stand against the Rent Act. So, thank you, Dennis, for that. But he also said to me, "Where are you working?" And I said, "Glatwell Pit." He says, Gordon, that's his late brother, works there. He'll take you to union meetings." So the next thing I know, I'm active in NUM. Purely on that conversation on the corner of Bertrand Avenue and Thanet Street, and purely because I didn't say no to Dennis Skinner. I don't think I'm alone in not daring, not daring to say no to him. And that's how I started getting active. And then, we took a stand in Clay Cross, 72 through to 74, against the Rent Act. And for that, we were cast out of office, surcharged. Some of us were made bankrupt. I faced bankruptcy with a young family. And then you really do start to realise the injustices of the system. And I came into contact with left-wing politics and that really, in a nutshell, in a bizarre way, is the start of it. Had I not been walking down Bertrand Avenue, having been up Clay Cross that day, I might have ended up being, just Johnny Anybody, and still being angry, still being upset with system, but shouting at the telly like we all do permanently.
I think there's a common thread I'm noticing here, and a lot of what you're talking about, so you talked about community and how the community spirit was, and how people came together, and then you've talked about basically the backlash against that. You've talked a little bit about the pit closures. You've talked about the Rent Act and everything like that. Do you think that this, I know that we're in a class war. I know that you know and feel that. Do you think other people understand that? And really, is this coming from a position where people in power, the Tories in particular, are looking at something and saying, "I don't want this to happen. I don't want this. I don't want them to have this level of control over their lives. I don't want them to have this community."
Well, the Tories represent their class, and they're damn good at it. If only Labour had ever been as good at representing our class. And I think they know the potential that lies within us. The problem is, as I've said, people are too busy holding body and soul together to think about a lot of this. And if I put an intellectual hat on, Gramsci said that the ruling class rules by consent, in a way that people actually give it the power. And I don't think that it takes a struggle, it takes a movement for people to realise what potential they have to change society. I think our strike came as near as anything to a revolution in this country, and had we won, I think we'd be living in a different sort of Great Britain today. But I think that amongst all that, we have to say that there's been a failure of our politicians, our so-called politicians and trade union leaders, to explain that, to capitalise upon the potential inside everybody, and instead they've tried to manage the system just a little bit better than the Tories do. And as I said earlier, if we didn't turn up for work, Jeff Bezos's lights wouldn't switch on. He wouldn't have his 200 odd billion quid to not do anything with. And I think that we have to educate people, not in a patronising way. You can't just preach to people, but point out how their everyday lives could be better. Point out how it's the system that grinds them down, that it's the system that causes all their problems. And I think, the trouble with our movement is the people at the top, trade union leaders in particular, because I never expected anything from Tony Blair. I never expected anything at all from Starmer. And I think, I didn't expect that much from Jeremy Corbyn. What he did was sort of let the genie out of the bottle and show what could have been achieved had the movement behind him been harnessed and actually turned into something active, rather than just focusing on, internal Labour Party stuff. And that's not to denigrate those people who were inspired by that movement, but let's face it, after we were defeated in '85, the old trade union movement rolled over and said, just give us what you can. We're not going to be too militant. We're not going to ask for too much. And at the same time, trade union leaders became so divorced from reality. With general secretaries on 100,000 plus, and things like that. And they started becoming insurance brokers rather than class fighters. I think we've seen some very, very great exceptions. The Bakers Union, in particular, led by some great people with some, great activists, have led the fight for a £15 minimum wage, have actually won victories in Hovis against employers trying to institute 0 hours contract. But the mess we're in now, with people not knowing whether they'll have work tomorrow or not, sat at the end of the telephone on a 0 hours contract, waiting for somebody to ring and offer them a couple of hours work. The mess we're in is because the trade union movement and its leaders haven't fought. And you can trace that right back to our defeat in '85. But I think that I'm an optimist. I see signs that things are changing. I see anger developing, and who knows what sort of world we're going to emerge into post-COVID. I mean, the Tories and people of the people they rule for have taken full advantage of this pandemic, to fire and rehire. When Priti Patel says there are 8 million economically inactive people in this country, she means the sick, the elderly, the disabled. They're superfluous to capitalism's needs. And we're seeing now, why did they let COVID run rampant in nursing homes? Everybody who died in a nursing home, tragically, and I always use the phrase murdered in a Tory cult, has saved the government small fortunes in social care allowances and things like that. The way the NHS has been run down, and frontline workers having put their lives on the line, having turned out and worked 16 hours days non-stop to keep our people alive, and are told you're only worth 1% if you're lucky. We need to explain why this happens. It's not just a twist of fate. It's the system. And it's the system that these Tories represent. And unfortunately, we've got a Labour Party led by people who think, this is great, who actually, are supporting it and propping up this government. And if only an opposition was needed at this time, it's been now. And sadly, it's lacking. So I think it's up to us to, whenever we can, either at the moment we're doing it on things like this because we can't take to the streets, but I'm hoping post-COVID there's a movement that actually takes to the streets and at the very least, start questioning why things are how we are. And let's hope that eventually, I doubt very much now that I'll see it, but let's hope we can start something that starts a proper transformation and a proper change and brings about a decent world. We're just going to increase our nuclear capability by 40% in case Russia or China wants to take over our food banks and our people on 0 hour contracts, wants to take over our failing NHS. We'd rather build weapons of mass destruction that this time next year will be obsolete than actually build a decent society, than put it into healthcare, than give nurses a decent wage. Now, if Starmer and company won't say that, if the trade union leaders won't say that, then we have to say it on whatever platform we've got. And I'm very fortunate. My, campaigns with Orgreave Truth and Justice gives me an opportunity to speak to marvellous people and say these sort of things. But wouldn't it be great if we had a Labour leadership, trade union leadership, that were saying this to their members, not just to 50, 60 people in a hall or a few thousand people outside in a rally? It could really transform things.
So much that I could go on there, absolutely so much I could go on. But what I want to talk about is, some people would listen to what you've said there and think that's quite cynical, but you've lived it. Like your cynicism about the government and the Labour Party there comes from experience, doesn't it? And you spoke about Orgreave as well. So, is that what the picture is behind you? Is that
That's
what's
what
going
it
on with the
seems
picture?
from Orgreave. That's obviously some young lads being and a mounted police charge chasing them actually through the village. And if you look, topless T-shirts, they'd obviously been dressed to go and declare war on these riot coppers, hadn't they? Which was the narrative of the day, that miners put on T-shirts and shorts on a hot summer's day and went to a place in South Yorkshire to attack 6,000 heavily armed riot police. That's the reality of it. And that didn't just happen at Orgreave. It happened almost every day in every mining community throughout the land. I myself were badly injured and my head smashed in way before Orgreave, April the 9th, Crestwood Colliery, Nottinghamshire Pit in Derbyshire. When a copper took a shine to the back of my head and decided he'd have a bit of head smashing practice on it, and I was lucky to survive. And but as I say, that 11,000 of our people, 11,000 miners were arrested. Over 7,000 were injured. That's not just had a bruise, had a little bit of a scrape. That's people who required medical attention. 2 pickets murdered on the picket line. 5 men and children buried, digging coal to keep their houses warm. That's what that picture's about. We fought a fight. We weren't after more money. We wanted to do a job that a lot of people would turn their nose up at. We wanted to go miles underground, dig the nation's coal, keep, people's houses warm, and keep the sort of community I talked about earlier together. And for that, we were called the enemy within. For wanting a job, for wanting a community, and for wanting all the dignity that went with that, we were criminalised. And terror that has hardly ever been seen for centuries in Britain was unleashed upon us. That again, that shows the rottenness of the system. It also shows the lengths that they'll do to protect what they've got and keep this system going. So yeah, that's what that picture's about. And it's that year is ultimately the thing that completely shaped me as an activist. It showed me tremendous solidarity. I had young kids at the time. They were clothed by the generosity of people like yourselves who supported our struggle. My kids had a Christmas that I didn't think they were going to get, because French miners loaded teddy bears, games, things like that into the backs of the lorries and sent them over to us. That's the sort of solidarity you build a new world on. That's the sort of thing that, we have to recreate, not just in one industry. Well, let's get up off our knees and let's challenge this rotten system.
Yeah, I think that solidarity is the massively important thing, and when we show it to one another, I think people get a massive surprise. They don't really expect to like human nature's. Do you think human nature's good in general? Do you think people are? Do you think their like baseline characteristic is to be kind and to help each other?
Well, the human race has survived because of its collective spirit. We're not uh, fast enough to outrun animals. We're not strong enough to kill the things like lions and tigers and things. We've existed because mankind is a communal animal, and I think that spirit is deep within us all. And you see it in sometimes in the most unlikely places. People who rush into burning buildings to save people and things like that. The unfortunate thing is that the system in which we live pits us one against each other. We're told that it's you've got to have a nicer house than next door. That it's about physical things that you can buy that determine you, and everything, the television, everything, the adverts, everything about it is geared to selling that message that if somehow you're not comfortable, if you lose your job, if you fall on hard times, it's your fault. There's something wrong with you. That's what we're told. Whereas in reality, it's this rotten system. And yeah, I do think, there's good in most people. And if we could tap into that and turn it into a proper movement and a proper force, and then we could have achieved. We live on a world where we're going to fly a helicopter around Mars, and we can't feed people who are sleeping in doorways just down the road. We've got people in other parts of the planet starving to death because richer countries have stolen their wealth, have exploited, their natural resources and left them with nothing. It does not have to be like that. We can build something. It's there inside us all. We would never have survived. Man lives in the most inhospitable climates, lives in deserts, in frozen wastelands. That's because that humanity, is a collective spirit, and people, we used to live collectively, before this system broke broke all that up. Yeah, and it's there, and I live in hope that we can tap into that, and that we've got a long way to go because the ruling class aren't the ruling class for nothing. They didn't get there by accident. They're experts at it, and they know how to exploit. Pick up any newspaper tomorrow, and it'll be selling you this dream that things are great, that Boris is a great leader, and that we should all worship the royal family, uh, and things like that. And it's nonsense. And we have to build a movement that channels that basic humanity into something more positive and into a force for change.
Every time that seems to happen at the minute, so let's take, for example, the vigil that was held for Sarah Everard recently, and and people were peacefully holding a vigil, and they were attacked. The protest, they weren't even protesting, and now we've got these new laws against protests and things. Do you think that it's a fear of solidarity of what people can do? So the collectivism, if people are collectivized and get behind an idea and start supporting one another and caring about one another, do you think they know that this could absolutely ruin the system for their class? And it,
Oh,
yeah,
oh yeah, definitely. I mean, they don't need these new laws. you know, the things that happened to me, the things that happened, you know, we've just seen the marvellous victory of the Shrewsbury Pickets, you know, the way they killed Desi Warren. They didn't need these new laws to do that. They didn't need to bring in any acts of parliament. They're bringing it in because they're scared. I think that they're afraid that post-pandemic, that things, you know, when people start realising the true consequences of what the Tories have done to us over this past year, and even before that could turn to anger. They've seen what happens in other countries, you know, the yellow vests in France. Many countries in Africa now are on the verge of revolution. We've seen what's happening in Belarus, where people have risen up against a tyrannical government. They know it can happen to them. They spent the equivalent of £30 billion in today's money to defeat the strike of one union, the NUM. They didn't do that just because they wanted to defeat the NUM and close pits. They did it to send a message to the movement that if we can do it to them, we can do it to you. And, you know, we could still resurrect. We've seen marvellous fight back, seen Rolls-Royce strikers winning victories. We're seeing tenants movement emerging against evictions. Yeah, they're afraid. They're afraid. You know, that phrase, you know, we are many, they are few, there's never been, you know, such relevant. When people say to me, there are 6 billionaires that own more than 50% of Britain's wealth, I think 6 billionaires, I could get 5 lads, even at my age, and we could take the bastards tomorrow. So what could the movement do if it got up, you know, if it realised its potential and realised its strength? We'd be unstoppable. They know that, you know. They tried to crush us. You know, I mentioned the Durham Gala. According to Thatcher, the trade union movement were defeated and dead. You know, we weren't supposed to be there. We're not supposed to be doing things like this, because the whole idea of fighting for a different society had gone. And where are we now? Thatcher's dead, and we're here talking about revolution. You know, so, you know, it's in our hands to do it. We just have to create that movement. And I think that movement's going to have to take place in communities and in the streets. It's not going to happen through a parliament, you know, with a parliamentary Labour Party. No government is going to grant us this. We've got to fight for it. And it's something worth fighting for. It's called a world. It's worth fighting for. It's a beautiful world. There's beautiful bits of nature, you know, that we could enjoy. And yeah, well worth going out there and having a bit of go for it, I think. I mean, I don't know what I'd do. You know, I'm Mr. Angry. If I weren't active in movement, you know, what would I be? I'd have to be a serial killer or something like that. You know, I might just target Tories or anything like that. But yeah, you know, I'm angry. You know, I lost my community. I lost my job. I came near to death by having my head smashed in. Coppers made. A surgeon stitched me up without anaesthetic. You don't forget that lightly, you know. I'm still angry after all that. So, yeah, I'm just getting angrier by the day. You know, I shout at the telly. You know, neighbours think we're having a domestic a lot at the time, you know. I'm barred from Curry's for shouting at the telly that much. So, yeah, let's get angry, you know. Let's get up off our knees and let's get stuck into them.
I always go towards the end, and you've already started doing it. It's that hopeful message for the future. Now, over the past few years, we've seen people, particularly young people, they've grown up and they thought, hang on, I'm never going to own a house. I'm never going to have, what my parents had. With people now we're seeing the first few generations of people who were poorer than the parents, but they seem to understand. They seem to understand that this system is broken. And I think one of the things that's disappointed me about the Labour Party lately is they've forgotten about those young people who were really the bedrock of the movement, the enthusiastic movement, because I think socialism's hopeful. So 2017, that big hopeful message, we had big gigs and all sorts of things and a really hopeful feel to it. Young people on the streets out campaigning, and that's disappearing. So where, like, how can we make that hopeful message come back? How can we harness those hopeful people who want to
I
see
think
change?
they're still there. I think we have to. One message we've got to get across to younger generations is, whether you're an environmental activist, whether you're a community activist, whether there's only one answer, and that's socialism. That's the only thing that can solve all the world's problems. So, we've got to get them fighting for a system change, not just a tinkering about in a sort of nicer, cuddlier form of capitalism. And I, I think we have to get them more involved in the movement. There are still proportionately fewer young people in trade unions, let alone active in trade unions, than at any time in history. So we have to redress that. The movement itself has to reach out to these people and say, come and stand with us. We've got a common aim. Whatever you're fighting for, we need to change the system, because the system will never give you what you're after. And I think, we can harness that. I think, okay, the movement that we saw around Corbynism, I mean, at one time, the first couple of years before it got all totally bogged down in the Brexit argument and parliamentary wranglings, I spoke at a rally with Corbyn in Sheffield on a wet Friday night. 10,000 people turned up. Now, who in the right mind would want to go to Sheffield anyway? Coming from Derbyshire, I'm allowed to say that, it's in my contract. But on a wet Friday night, we saw that all over the country. The tragedy is that was not turned into a mass movement. It became, focused solely on Labour. And I know we had to fight to defend Corbyn from the coup and that. But, oh, what an opportunity we had. I was so lucky to be involved in that, because I never thought I'd see anything like that in my lifetime. And let's remember, that movement came out of the blue. We had to struggle to get Corbyn even nominated on the ballot paper. So it only takes a little spark and things could ignite again. We have to do our best on whatever platform, wherever we are, to keep talking about that. Whether we're addressing strikers, whether we're addressing Labour Party meetings, it's all about, got to change the system. We've got to abolish capitalism.
And there's a lot going on, isn't there? Like you've mentioned that quite clearly there, that there's a lot going on outside the Labour Party. So your feeling was far too much focus on Labour itself, and would you think that needs to be a key focus going forward to get like more things going on and trying to get things under an umbrella of socialism, but a really loose umbrella, rather than like, it's all got to be in the Labour Party and that's our only thing?
I'm still in Labour Party. I'm suspended, but I know there are great comrades outside of it. Great comrades who've been expelled, great comrades who've left, great comrades who never joined, but they're all there, for the struggle. I saw, that picture there, this lad there. I wrote, he'll be a young man in his 20s who probably never ever thought, he'd be part of a police riot, but was prepared to stand and fight. And I think that when, as I say, it can be the tiniest catalyst that sparks things off. And who knows where it will come from. But I'm more and more convinced it will come irrelevant to the Labour Party. It'll be a social movement that somehow takes to the streets and becomes a similar battle to what we saw 37 years ago. It's there. Sometimes you can almost walk outside and smell it in the air. There's anger, there's discontent. Now that can go away as quickly as it arises, but we need a labour movement worthy of that name, and it's up to us to transform it. It's up to us to get active in our unions and make sure they fight. Instead of just giving us diaries once a year, and I'm in Unite Community, and I just get so fed up. Every week I get a call about car insurance or life insurance, funeral plans. I think they must know something. They've seen the medical records. That's not what trade unionism is about. It's about, one, it's about defending members, but two, it's about fighting for something better. And I think it's still there. Corbynism might have been defeated, but it will arise again, but in a different form. And who knows what might spark it off? But post-COVID, once things are back to some relative normality, people might start taking a look and thinking it didn't have to be like that. And then we've got to offer them the reasons why and what we can do about it.
Absolutely brilliant, John. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm sure everyone's going to really enjoy hearing what you've got to say. And let's hope it gets some people behind us, and inspires a few people out there.
Well, like I say, we've got to do what we can. I've been fortunate. I've been involved in many struggles and learned many lessons. And if I can pass just a little bit of that on to anybody who listens, I'm happy to do it. And can I congratulate you, on the platform you've created? We need it, and it shows the versatility of people in our movement, that you can create something like this, in your living room. We can talk to people at the far ends of the earth now quite easily. So let's use it. Let's get out there and do it.
Solidarity, John. Thank you.
And you, mate. Cheers. Next time we win.
Keep the red flag flying.